This is the Owl of Wisdom. Like and subscribe for 10 years of good luck. If you don't, it won't be pretty. Dear prison guards of Reddit, was there ever a prisoner that you felt bad for? Why? Late to the party, but I have a story. I currently work as a correctional officer. There's one inmate in particular I think about all the time, and it breaks my heart. Most of us don't usually get involved with charges or how they got there. We just do our job and look at everyone equally. This guy was about 50 plus, balding and skinnier looking. He was on a suicide watch, which is when they have to be checked in every 10 minutes. The cell he was in was across from our desk. We usually keep higher risk people here. I came in to relieve the day shift and took over. Naturally he sits in the staff's eyesight at all times. All night, he was reading a book, watching TV, and minding his own business. Whenever we asked how he was doing, he would nod and continue reading his book until he went to sleep. In the morning, about an hour before shift change, he started crying on his bunk. The soft crying turned to all-out sobbing, and he was also grabbing his head and squeezing it. We asked if he was okay, but wouldn't even acknowledge us. We kept a close eye on him, and I decided to look into his history a bit. Turns out this guy murdered his wife with a knife, and the niece who was staying with them temporarily saw the whole thing. The report said he was compliant with police and correctional staff. It was odd, so I did a bit of research. The guy used to be a plump, jolly dude and was loved in the community, owns a bakery, wife is the baker and family runs it. Not a mean bone in his body. It was a shock to look at a photo of him months before compared to now. After reading that, the guy starts seizing. We took him into the hospital, and I was with him again that night. He was talking and doing okay at this point, but was delusional. He would say things like, "Have you met my wife? She's a fantastic baker. You would love her apple fritters. Swing by the bakery and I'll give you guys one on the house." Turns out the guy had multiple cancerous brain tumors and was in the last stages. His mind started to go, and one night he snapped and stabbed his wife. He has no idea where he is most of the time, but every now and then, he would snap back to reality and realize where he was and what he'd done, and he would break down, only to forget everything minutes later. His family would come visit him at the hospital. While I was working, I would talk with them. They explained the whole story, and I let them know he was in good hands with us. They even brought him and us a donut from their bakery. We don't let inmates have anything from the outside unless it's searched and approved by management, but in this guy's case I let it slide. The family of his wife even say it wasn't his fault, and they still love him. I worked in a jail as a deputy for a little under 2 years. My county was pretty progressive and the jail was pretty nice, all things considered. Most inmates had come to terms with why they were there, and life wasn't too bad, just boring. I don't know of any inmates who maintained that they were innocent or that they didn't belong in jail. There were plenty of people that seemed like good people that had just done a bad thing, and plenty of people that seemed like they were actively trying to improve themselves. I know a lot that got jids while in jail. There were a few times that I really felt sorry for any of them. Once when a repeat offender got a much longer sentence than he expected because he was a repeat offender. The thing was, he had actually misunderstood the judge. He was sentenced to I think 9 years, with 4 suspended, so 5 total, and didn't really understand what that meant. So he was walking around all morose. He got kinda happy when I got to knock 4 years off his sentence. The other circumstance was whenever I would have to notify an inmate that a close family member had died. I had to do this a total of 5 times. For some reason it always happened on my shift. Often they weren't able to go to the funeral service because they were incarcerated. Being in jail, those guys had to act like they were tough, try not to cry when hearing that their mom or brother passed away, but of course that's always emotional. It was always hard to keep myself from crying. I pretty much have those guys the key to the city, unlimited phone use, extra food if they wanted it, unlimited rec time, and I'd let them have a friend or two out on rec with them, so they had someone to talk to. Chaplin on speed dial. I can't imagine having to go through that under those circumstances. Yes. 3. One killed his niece's rapist. There's more to the story, and he didn't kill him to prevent/stop the rape, but come on. And yes, it was proven that the niece was raped by the victim. It's just my inmate got to him before the police. He has been released though, a year or two ago. After doing 20+ years. The second guy was an inmate who was the getaway driver for 3 other dudes. He was 16 at the time of the crime. He never flipped on the other 3 and ended up doing 40 years before finally being paroled about 2 to 3 years ago. He literally grew up in prison. He has an amazing support system though, thankfully, and he stayed local to the facility, so a few of my coworkers have seen him on the outside and caught up with him. He's doing great. It just amazed and saddened me that it took so long. His accomplices had been in and out of the system multiple times. They kept getting those chances, and he didn't. Pissed a lot of us co's off too, that it took so long. Third one, he was a Hasidic Jew from Nice. I think 18 to 19 years old when we got him. Very high up on the Hasidic Jew totem pole. He threw a Molotov cocktail through the window of another HJ's house. No casualties, I believe just an arson charge, and he got a flat 8-year bid. Now, the reason I felt bad for him, in these communities, sexual molestation/grooming/etc run rampant, and no one talks about it, and certainly no one steps up to accuse an abuser a lot of the times. At the age of 12, the inmate was sent to live with the grand poobah of rabbis, to be like his houseboy, or whatever. The victim was a dude who wouldn't go to temple where Grand Poobah Rabbi held services, choosing to pray with old folks at the adult home, or hospitals, etc. This didn't sit well with GPR. Then this kid, who was pretty much sheltered, and I believe groomed, all of a sudden shows up with a Molotov cocktail, and now he's in prison? I truly believe he was coerced/forced into doing this to send a MSG to the victim, and every higher up washes their hands of it and let him take the blame. I even said as much to the inmate, and his response was a half grin as he walked away. I can't remember the kid's name, but with the info given, I'm sure you can find the articles. I read the articles and it just screamed this kid was groomed and forced into this. Not a police officer, but EMT. We have a couple prisons, and we respond to them. One is a maximum prison. Got a call there for a 21-year-old having seizures. He's in segregation, literally what they call it, which is pretty much a room by himself. No one can tell us how long he's been seizing. Straight up in status epilepticus, a seizure without any breaks. It's so bad that his airway is going, and I was ventilating him on the way to the hospital. He shares the same birthday as my younger brother. He was admitted to the hospital and in the ICU for over a month. Thankfully he made a recovery, but never found out the cause of his seizure. I looked up what he did. Possession of marijuana. Police officer here, not a prison guard. I felt bad for lots of inmates. We had one guy who killed his neighbor after finding the guy sexually assaulted his young child. Another one was a woman who stabbed her ex-boyfriend after finding out he had sex with all 3 of her underage daughters. I've seen lots of people commit crimes because of all kinds of bad situations. I even had a woman attack me because I arrested her boyfriend for beating her severely. We had to take them both to jail, and I felt bad for her, even though she attacked me. Anyways, you'd be amazed at the amount of sad lives, stories and circumstances. Most people who end up in jail made poor choices, but didn't really have much of a chance. That being said, there are a few people that commit heinous crimes that deserve worse. I do contract medical work in prisons. I feel bad for a lot of them, many with little education who have been abused or exploited. So broken they would listen to anyone. Drug charges for a lot of those. DUIs too. For murderers though, I feel bad for people who are so mentally messed up they're almost not human. I feel bad for them, even though their crimes are heinous. A lot of them never had a chance at a normal life, even with the best of medication. It's so sad for me to think of an existence like that. Then there's so many people I've met who seem like cool normal people, and I look on their med sheet and they're on like 12 different behavioral meds. A lot of them say they're thankful for the doctors in there because they never got help on the outside. Usually their mental illness led them to their crimes. I feel bad for them because of their circumstances, but I also think they're the ones who say I know why I'm in here and I deserve to be in here. They want to take responsibility. MSEO, and we used a house to be able to house 17-year-olds. I was new to the job and the idea that a 17-year-old would be in jail just seemed like such a foreign idea, but I thought everyone makes mistakes. So I took upon myself to talk this kid. He in there for something stupid, retail theft, something dumb like that. 17 years old bug-eyed, still adjusting to his full grown body. I told him that he owed himself better than this. To get his jed to find a job, any honest buck was a good buck, that this was no life for him or anyone else, and that, since he was so young, his life didn't have to be defined by this one stupid thing. He sure made me believe he heard me, and I looked out for him in any way the rules would allow. He got out, then he came back, this time for something more serious. He went to prison. Got out of prison, came back to jail. This cycle has repeated itself 4 times I think in the past 14 years. Each time he comes back he looks a little harder, a little older now. Instead of looking 10 years younger than me, he looks 10 years older than me. That was the first and last time I made a serious effort to talk to an inmate. I'll learn to keep my distance. I don't mistreat them, I'm consistent. When I do my job, I'm indifferent to them. The one thing inmates hate above all else is a guard that is inconsistent. I asked him if he knew me, and he said yes, and I asked him if he knew I always gave him extra when I had it, and he said yes, and then I told him that if he kept acting up, that I wouldn't be allowed to help him anymore. That seemed to sink in, and after that we never really had a problem, and I kept giving him extra food whenever I had it to give. Didn't seem to matter what it was, a bowl of green beans would fill his belly and kept him in line. A friend of mine was a screw in the local jail, not so much felt bad for, but more empathetic to. She liked working with the murderers. Most of them were in for a crime of passion. They were normal people who had a moment, a relapse of judgment in a really hard to judge situation. They weren't there to kill anything that moved. They didn't get off on it. They weren't sociopaths. For the most part. She had some good stories. There was a riot once, and 3 inmates guarded her from other inmates who were just going for everyone and anyone. They kept her safe, which I thought was really wholesome. My GF used to be a therapist in a women's penitentiary near Mexico City. She worked with many women who had committed serious crimes. In some cases she heard of, they were forced to, either by someone else, pimps, drug dealers, abusive spouses, etc., or the situation itself. For example, being victims for so long they murdered their perpetrators, and so on. Women in Mexican jails are often subject to prostitution by the guards, inmate violence, or are taken advantage of by the authorities, since they don't know their rights or legal situation. They sometimes gave birth in jail and were allowed to keep their kids in there until they turned 5. We sometimes took them out to the fair and stuff. They did not know they lived in a jail cell and just called it home. Let me tell you, motherhood changed these women for the better, and you could see they'd give their lives for their children. I guess we felt bad about the fact that no matter how reformed these women were, they would probably never have great chances when they got out, and some would go right in after a few months, never to see their babies again, but through a glass window. I worked county jail, and, for a time, I worked with juvenile offenders. It was honestly something I enjoyed, and, if pay wasn't an issue, I'd work with juvenile offenders for the rest of my life. Every single juvenile offender I dealt with all came from some broken home. Some got involved with gangs at young ages. Some thought that made them hot shit in a champagne glass, but they didn't realize they were just being used. None of their homies were putting money on their books. One of my good kids was named Colton Orr. He was in for blasting his stepmom with a shotgun while she slept. Afterward, he went to the local police office to tell them what he'd done. He said he did so because his stepmom was abusive towards him in ways physically, mentally, and even sexually. However, the court didn't care much about his claims on the basis that there was simply no evidence of her being abusive. He got sentenced to life with possibility of parole in 25 years. One of the hardest things about working with them is that it was hard to console them. You couldn't just say to them that things will get better because you knew that they would never be able to live normal, healthy lives. They were doomed to a hard life, and everyone in that block had to deal with that fact. Not many. I just don't like the guys that honestly have sex with women who say they're over 18 then find out the women like. Those people don't deserve to be in jail. My boyfriend, the prison guard who deals with pedophiles and murders almost exclusively. Jailer, detention officer, here. As a general rule I try not to look too deeply into what an inmate is being held for beyond what is necessary for me to do my job. It's the court's place to decide guilt or innocence, not mine. That having been said, there are inmates whom I have felt bad for. It's hard to watch someone detoxing severely and not feel anything at all. People who are incarcerated on clearly minor charges during particularly cold times of the year merely for the sake of survival, the mentally ill, etc. are all worthy of a level of empathy. The one that stands out the most was a military veteran. We got the full briefing because he/she was potentially violent. This inmate was incarcerated for trespassing at the Veterans Affairs Hospital. Clearly suffering from severe mental illness and PTSD, some chain of decision making had decided that he wasn't entitled to the same care that all of our veterans should be entitled to, and instead he should be arrested and placed in a padded jail cell for trial. Granted, the local VA may not have been equipped to handle someone of his/her physical ability safely, but still that was a particularly hard pill to swallow. Thanks for watching the Chronicles of Reddit. Like and subscribe for a marvelous life of adventure.